Fired for pushing safety, now I'm thriving, and my old boss is barely hanging on. Success is the best revenge. 3 years ago, I was fired from Luminous Heritage Studio, a stained glass workshop in Los Angeles where I worked as an artist, specializing in glass painting and design. The irony of losing my job for being vocal about company safety still makes me shake my head, though now I can do it with a smile rather than frustration. I remember my first day at Luminous Heritage like it was yesterday. The smell of lead came wafting through the air as soon as I opened the door, making my nose wrinkle. Having just moved from Aurora Studio in Seattle, where safety protocols were treated like gospel, the loose approach to harmful materials immediately set off alarm bells in my head. The owner, Marcus Thompson, a man in his mid-50s with wire-rimmed glasses and perpetually lead-stained fingers, gave me what he probably thought was a reassuring smile when I mentioned the ventilation issues. "We've been doing things this way for 20 years, he said, walking me through the cramped workspace where 4 other artists were hunched over their projects. Never had any problems." That should have been my first red flag, but the opportunity to work in one of LA's most established stained glass studios had been too tempting to pass up. The portfolio pieces in their front window had drawn me in like a moth to flame: intricate cathedral windows, delicate residential installations, and contemporary pieces that pushed the boundaries of traditional stained glass art. I wanted to be part of that legacy, to learn from their decades of experience. Within my first week, Marcus made me the safety person, not because he cared about safety, but because it was required by law to have someone in that position. "You seem to know about all this OSHA stuff," he said, dropping a dusty binder on my workstation. "Why don't you handle it?" I took the role seriously, perhaps too seriously for Marcus's taste. I spent my evenings poring over OSHA manuals, highlighting sections about proper ventilation systems, protective equipment requirements, and chemical handling procedures. The list of violations I found in the studio was longer than some of our commissioned pieces. Sarah Chen, our lead designer who had been with the studio for 15 years, would often roll her eyes when I brought up safety concerns during our morning meetings. "We've survived this long," she'd say, echoing Marcus's sentiment. But I couldn't help noticing how her hands would shake slightly while holding her coffee cup, a common symptom of long-term lead exposure. I documented everything meticulously. The improper storage of hydrofluoric acid we used for etching glass, the lack of proper respirators when working with lead came, the insufficient ventilation system that barely met standards from the 1990s. I created detailed reports, complete with cost-effective solutions and implementation timelines. Most of these reports ended up in Marcus's to-do pile, which we all knew was really a never-going-to-happen pile. The studio itself was a converted warehouse in the Arts District, with high ceilings that trapped heat like a greenhouse in summer. The ventilation system wheezed more than it worked, pushing around hot air laden with metal particles rather than actually filtering it. We had about 20 workstations, though only 8 were regularly occupied. The rest held various projects in different stages of completion, some gathering dust for months while clients haggled over prices or designs. I remember one particular project that became a turning point in my relationship with the studio. We were commissioned to create a massive installation for a new church in Pasadena, 12 panels depicting scenes from Genesis. The budget was generous, and the design possibilities were exciting. I suggested we use a new lead-free solder I'd learned about from my contacts at Aurora Studio. It was slightly more expensive but significantly safer for both the artists and the environment. Marcus's response? "We're not here to reinvent the wheel. We do things the traditional way because that's what our clients expect." That traditional way included having Jim, our senior craftsman who had been there for 25 years, handle raw lead with bare hands because gloves made him lose sensitivity. It included Katie, our newest hire fresh out of art school, developing a persistent cough within her first month that nobody seemed concerned about. It included watching Marcus himself dismiss the strange metallic taste in the drinking water as probably just the pipes. Then came COVID-19, and suddenly workplace safety wasn't just about long-term exposure to heavy metals, it was about immediate survival. While other businesses scrambled to implement safety protocols, Marcus treated the pandemic like just another inconvenience to be ignored. Masks were optional in the studio, despite state mandates. Social distancing was impossible given our workspace layout, but no attempts were made to modify it. I became more vocal, more insistent. I printed CDC guidelines and posted them around the studio. I brought in boxes of masks using my own money. I tried to organize shifts to reduce the number of people working simultaneously. Each suggestion was met with increasing resistance from Marcus. "You're creating unnecessary panic," he told me during one particularly heated discussion. "We're like family here. Families don't need to wear masks around each other." What Marcus failed to understand was that real families protect each other. They listen to concerns and take action to ensure everyone's safety. Instead, he created an environment where speaking up was seen as disloyalty. I wasn't surprised when OSHA showed up for an inspection. Though I hadn't made the call myself, I had certainly considered it. The inspector, a woman named Linda Martinez, spent 3 hours going through the studio. She looked exactly like you'd expect an OSHA inspector to look: practical shoes, clipboard in hand, and an expression that said she'd seen it all before. The violations she documented were extensive. Improper storage of hazardous materials, inadequate ventilation, insufficient personal protective equipment. The list went on. Marcus stood there, his face growing redder with each note she made, shooting glances in my direction that made his suspicions clear. The following week, Marcus hired Robert Sullivan, a glass artist from San Diego. Robert was good, I'll give him that, but he was also completely new to large-scale architectural pieces, which was supposedly our studio's specialty. Still, Marcus made a show of having Robert shadow me, to learn the ropes. My safety person duties were quietly removed from my responsibilities. No announcement, no explanation, just a memo saying that Jim would be taking over workplace compliance matters. Jim, who still refused to wear gloves while handling lead. The writing was on the wall, or in this case, etched into the glass. I started bringing home my personal tools piece by piece, backing up my design files, making copies of my project notes. I'd been around long enough to know what was coming. 2 months after the OSHA inspection, Marcus called me into his office. The room was small, with samples of his early work hanging in the window, pieces from when the studio was just getting started, beautiful in their simplicity. He had prepared a speech about current economic conditions and having to make difficult decisions. But we both knew the real reason. "We're going to have to let you go," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Lack of work." I wanted to laugh. Lack of work? We had 3 major church commissions in progress, 2 residential projects about to start, and a backlog of repairs that would keep anyone busy for months. Not to mention Robert, my supposed replacement, had just been hired. But I didn't argue. I didn't point out the obvious lies. I simply nodded, packed up my remaining belongings, and walked out of Luminous Heritage Studio for the last time. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the high windows, creating rainbow patterns on the floor through pieces of scrap glass, a final ironic goodbye from a place that had never truly valued what I had to offer. The next few months were a blur of uncertainty and opportunity. I had been building my own artistic practice on the side, creating contemporary pieces that pushed the boundaries of traditional stained glass techniques. My small home studio, which I'd set up in my garage, became my sanctuary. I experimented with new materials, developed safer techniques, and most importantly, started putting my work out into the world on my own terms. It wasn't easy. Los Angeles isn't cheap, and the art world can be brutally competitive. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I should have kept my mouth shut at Luminous Heritage, played along with the way things had always been done. But every time I thought about Sarah's shaking hands or Katie's persistent cough, I knew I had done the right thing. I started small, selling pieces through local art fairs and online platforms. My background in architectural glass gave me an edge. I understood structure and light in ways that purely decorative artists sometimes missed. I began developing a signature style that combined traditional stained glass techniques with contemporary designs and safer materials. Word spread. A small gallery in Silver Lake featured 3 of my pieces in a group show. Then a larger gallery in West Hollywood requested a solo exhibition. My Instagram following grew as I shared not just my finished pieces but also my process, including detailed explanations of the safety measures I took in my work. I didn't just survive, I thrived. Each commission led to more opportunities. My waiting list grew longer. I was able to be selective about my projects, choosing ones that aligned with my artistic vision and ethical standards. The money I saved wasn't just security, it was validation that you could create beautiful work without compromising safety or integrity. Then came last night's event, the annual Glass Artists Guild exhibition. I knew there was a possibility I'd run into Marcus there, but I hadn't expected him to look so defeated. His hair had gone completely gray, and his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. The confident studio owner who had dismissed my safety concerns was gone, replaced by someone who seemed to be carrying the weight of his failing business on his back. He approached me during the reception, wine glass in hand. The irony wasn't lost on me. We were surrounded by some of the most innovative glass art in Los Angeles, including two of my pieces that had already sold for prices that would have made my younger self dizzy. "I heard you had a show," he said, trying to maintain his old authoritative tone but not quite managing it. I could have been petty. I could have mentioned how my solo show at Resonance Gallery had sold out opening night. I could have talked about my commissions booked through 2026, or the article in Art Glass Quarterly that had featured my work last month. I could have mentioned how my former colleagues were now working 2 days a week while I had to turn down projects because I was too busy. Instead, I simply smiled and said, "Yes, things are going really well." The look on his face was worth more than any lengthy explanation I could have given. He knew, and I knew, that firing me had been his biggest mistake, not just because of my artistic contributions, but because I had represented a chance for his studio to evolve, to become better, safer, more sustainable. As I watched him walk away, I felt no pleasure in his studio's decline. The artists still working there, Sarah, Jim, Katie, and the others, deserved better. They deserved a workplace that valued their health as much as their creativity. But change has to come from the top, and some people would rather watch their dreams crumble than admit they were wrong. Later that evening, as I drove home to my house in Echo Park, bought with the proceeds from my art, not bad for someone who was fired for lack of work, I thought about how life has a way of coming full circle. The safety concerns that had cost me my job had actually set me free. They had forced me to bet on myself, to build something better. My home studio, with its state-of-the-art ventilation system and properly stored materials, stands as a testament to everything I fought for at Luminous Heritage. It's proof that you can respect tradition while embracing progress, that you can create beautiful art without compromising anyone's health. The next morning, I opened my studio windows to let in the early morning light. The sun caught the edges of my latest piece, a modern interpretation of a traditional rose window, created entirely with lead-free materials. The rainbow patterns it cast across my workbench reminded me of that last day at Luminous Heritage, but this time, instead of saying goodbye, they were welcoming me to another day of doing what I love, safely and on my own terms. Success isn't just about the money in your savings account or the length of your commission waitlist. It's about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know that you stood up for what was right, even when it cost you something. It's about building something better than what you left behind. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's about being able to flash a genuine smile at the person who tried to punish you for caring too much, knowing that you've not just survived, you've soared.